Welcome to another episode of the Roundtable. Today, we're going to be taking a little bit of a different approach today with our formatting. We're going to be covering would you rather questions, and hopefully, this sparks a bit of a discussion and we can tease out what the would you rather question is trying to get at. Okay, so let's start off with the first one. Would you guys rather an athlete you work with overshoot every session and tell you, or not fill out their program? I'll start things off. Me personally, I think I would heavily would rather the athlete tell me when they overshoot. In this case, like let's assume if they don't fill out their program, they're still overshooting. Is that the question, Sam? I think you had written that originally.
Yeah, so if they're still filling out the program, it's just like standard. So there might be like the odd overshoot here and there.
Okay, so
like
got you.
with sticking to training. Yeah.
Got you. Okay. I think in that case, then I would rather someone not fill out their program. This is weighing two things, right? Like either someone who doesn't trust you and therefore they're constantly overshooting, or there's not enough like maturity with understanding what the program's trying to get at, right? So in that case, if someone's overshooting every program, even if they're being honest, if that's constantly happening, I think that's going to end up like not following through with what we have intended when we write it, right? Whereas if someone is not filling out their program and we assume that they're under communicating, even though that's happening, as long as they're doing the program as intended, it should still be fine. Like an occasional overshoot or undershoot is still going to happen, and it's going to happen regardless, or if like someone communicates or not. But I think so long as they follow it, that's going to lead to progress. As a coach, personally, I would rather be at a stage where I can see what's happening. But at the end of the day, if they follow it to the T, that's going to give progress, whether or not I prefer it or not. Sam or Dave, do you guys have thoughts on that?
Sure. So I guess so because it's all hypothetical, it's hard to kind of reason, but I think I would have to agree with you unless you could like have a conversation with the chronic overshooter and sort of like rein them in, because it's always nice to have someone that knows how to work hard, likes to work hard, and you can push them when need be. Whereas if you have someone on the opposite end of the spectrum where you're constantly having to tell them to go up, go up, go up if they're constantly sandbagging, I guess progression can be a little bit harder there if someone doesn't actually want to train hard. So there's like this, I guess 50-50 mix of like, it's nice to have someone who knows and wants to work hard, but at the same time, if they're just completely ignoring the RPE 6 on their program, that's less than ideal as well. So I'll have to agree with you and go with the person who follows the program properly, with that one.
Yeah, I'm agreeing with you and Dave too on that one. I think like it's just frustrating when it's like if it was session after session after session and they're constantly going like way too over the prescription, it's like what's the point in like coaching them, right? So like I think for me, I would rather not fill out the program because the frustration of them constantly like, not doing what they're told, for lack of a better term, would just frustrate the hell out of me. So I think I'd rather them, like, because normally people who don't fill out their program, normally like they're pretty good with their own load choices in terms of like they don't fill it out because they know what they did on the accessories the week before, and you kind of just like trust that they're like pushing themselves for the most part anyway, I found. So I think the other end would be even worse for me. I would just I don't.
Yeah, Leanne?
Yeah, I agree as well. I think, sorry, I think that like if they're overshooting for like that one block, but then you kind of educate them and you can kind of like they can learn from it and then move forward with that into the next block and actually not end up overshooting the whole block, then I think that's like I guess a good outcome. But if they constantly keep doing it, it's like Sam said, it's like there's only so much that you can say as a coach. So yeah, I think the person that doesn't fill in their program, I've also found that like those people also, like Sam said, are good at I guess the load selections. And if they're sending through videos anyway, like it's fine because it's like you kind of already know what they're doing, even though it's not on paper. so you can like somewhat follow it, but obviously the better outcome is if they're putting it into the spreadsheet.
Yeah. And Shania?
I don't know. I'm kind of 50-50. I don't feel like I have a preference over like one or the other. I would say like everyone at some point in their life has like chronically overshot like a number of sessions or hasn't filled their program out. So I feel like all of us here on this Zoom could say like we've all done one of those or like both of them at one point in our life, you know. Like as you learn and grow as an athlete, like you get better at like not overshooting, and like I think Sam's post just recently where like you get to identify your own trends. Like you get better at doing that, whereas we've all just like maxed out every single session to the point where like we RPE 10 like an 8, or we fail something and then we kind of message the coach and we're like, why did this happen? And then it's like not until you get like, you know, a few years down the track that you realize why. And there's also been times where, I don't know, Sam's terrible at filling in his program, so I'm gonna throw him under the bus there.
Pick a side.
I can't. I don't have a side.
Yeah.
I mean, if I go for my athlete, I would say like overshoot every time, go for it. I'll just gas you up as a coach. We'll manage the program side on the outside.
Yeah, it's hard, right? Because like we all know, like if someone is constantly overshooting, it means that the coach needs to jump in and make a lot more manipulations, if anything, to hold them back. So like we're going to be using a lot more like prescription-based stuff and having to lay the foundation out, because you're assuming that they're just going to be sending it if you don't, right? So like someone who overshoots is not taking responsibility of their load selection. They're just RP 10ing everything, right? It makes it harder to track trends. But as long as like, you know, the effort is there, right? So I think long term, so long as you're constantly applying effort over a period of time, that's going to put you in the right trajectory. But I think as coaches, we always think like the conservative side, right? Like what's going to happen if you keep sending it and then eventually if something bad happens, such as getting hurt, then it's like, then you're in trouble, right?
Look,
So
I've got one client that won't care that I'll throw under the bus, and that's Lucy. And I have Dave's laughing, but I have pretty much, when we first started working together, I just let her go, and it was like overshoot every session, or it was like she'll hit a PR and then she's like, I'm just gonna load 2.5 more and see what happens, and then it would be like the first single on a bench, for example, would be PR 2.5 more, she'd failed it, and then it's like her next primary session in the same week, 2 days later, she'd do the exact same thing. She'd like load that same load that she'd failed earlier in the week, hit it as a PR, load 2.5 more, fail. But I literally just let her go at the start. Like, and I just controlled it from a programming sense as best I could. But I also just let her learn, because I think, you know, Steve actually made a really good comment during PD where it's like, as athletes, we have a number, or we have it somewhere that we want to end up no matter what the coach tries to control, right? Like the athlete, we want to end the block somewhere. So it doesn't matter if we prescribe or control it, you know, for 3-4 weeks out of a 5-week block, that athlete is probably still going to take the same jump, because it's going to end them where they want to end, and they've had their eyes or their goals set on that no matter what. So I think it's not until like, you know, the athlete learns how to do that, and that comes from like the collaboration between coach and athlete, that's when it like, that's just the journey that anyone has to go through.
yeah, and you could argue like everyone, well, there's a certain type of lifter that would start off overshooting and end up evolving into that person who doesn't fill out their program, right?
Yep.
But yeah, I think we teed that pretty well. But it's, oh, Sam, did you have something you want to touch on?
No, he put his hand up.
Yeah. Right. But yeah, I think it just goes to show like once you can get yourself educated and you kind of see what the coach is trying to get out of the program, that's when you're like bought in and you understand what the coach is trying to look out for, right? So like I guess you could get to a point where you are complacent and you won't fill out the sheet, and that's at face value what's happening when you're not filling out the program, right? But I think it's still important to have that mode of communication between athlete and coach so that relationship continues rather than getting complacent. Cool. Next one we've got, let's go with, would you rather work with an athlete with a history of minor injuries who's highly coachable, or injury-free but resistant to coaching feedback? So they will constantly challenge technique cues, go off program, things like that. Then did you want to kick this one off?
Yeah, sure. So I definitely the first one. Yeah, the first one for sure. Because I feel like if someone's coachable, they, even though like they have minor injuries, if they're willing to, I guess, take on feedback, they actually end up going to progress quicker than the person who's like resistant to taking on that feedback. As long as like if they have those minor injuries or niggles and things, like if they're working with someone externally, so like physio or EP or something, and then we can kind of like collaborate as a team. I feel like that's the best sort of scenario in that situation. And they're kind of going to get the best out of their training. Whereas if someone like is resistant to feedback, they're pretty much like putting themselves in a position where they aren't actually that coachable, right? So like what the coach is saying, they're not taking on, and it's like there's kind of no point of them being coached by someone, like because they're not learning, I guess. So definitely the first person.
Yeah. Did you have your take on that?
I don't know. I feel like I'm always the person who's gonna say the opposite of everybody else. But I guess it just like it just depends. Like, are they resistant in terms of like they're just asking questions because they're curious, or are they actually uncoachable? Like, because I don't think being resistant or like I don't think being provided feedback and then the athlete asking a question around why or like what our take is as a coach or why we're telling them to do a certain thing or move a certain way make someone uncoachable. It just means that they're curious around the answer, right? So I guess it would kind of just depend. Like if the resistant made them uncoachable where, you know, like you were providing feedback, they were asking a question, you know, you were having a back and forth conversation about it, and then it led to them doing the same thing, then obviously that gets frustrating, but then it would just turn to the point where I'm just not going to repeat myself. So like it'll just end up like that being the coaching relationship. Whereas if it's like resistant from a perspective of like they're just genuinely curious and they just want to know like what our sort of answer is or what our thought process is behind making a decision, then I don't think there's anything wrong with that at all.
Yeah. I'll jump in on this one as well. I agree where you're coming from in the sense that at face value, if someone's like quote unquote resistant, right, is it out of curiosity and they're just questioning your thought process in order to understand your own rationale as a coach? I think that's, if anything, that's a really healthy place to be coming from with a coaching athlete relationship, right? Because it shows that the athlete is trying to take on board what's actually happening. And so long as the coach provides a proper rationale, if anything, that'll drive buy-in more, right? And it'll also filter out bad reasoning, right? Because if a coach is making lazy reasoning and an athlete is intelligent enough to, you know, and critical thinking enough to like look at what's being given and be like, why are we doing this? Sometimes it can help weed out bad decision making, or on a coach's end of things, like I guess like overthinking, overanalyzing, because that could also be a something that a coach does, right? So that will play into having a collaborative approach as well, right? But let's assume like if it's on the end of someone just like not listening because they just don't trust your judgment, even if you provide reasoning for it, it definitely does get quite frustrating. It's hard for me to take on an example right now, but I think if we just hypothetically bring that situation up, like it kind of removes the point of having a coach, like Leanne said, right? So then like the best that a coach can do from that point is just feed into what the athlete wants to do, essentially, right? It's not really going to like take on the experience and knowledge that a coach has. So at the end of the day, like it'll just be an athlete having a babysitter, essentially, versus having someone who's coachable and like say they've gone through like a training history where it hasn't really been ideal, going through minor setbacks. It's going to take more effort on the coaching side of things in order to manipulate things to ensure they stay healthy. But so long as someone stays coachable, they're listening and assuming they can't really push the dial and things. It's a frustrating place to be in to discuss expectations and the long time frame to get to a point where you can start making healthy progress again. But in the grand scheme of things, it's smoother sailing than constantly having someone to challenge you. Sam, Dave?
Yeah, I think the only situation where I'd probably prefer option 2 would be like if it was a shorter timeline. And again, I'm just trying to play devil's advocate here. Like if there was a shorter timeline where an athlete came to you and they had a competition, say for example, that they had to hit X amount of total, I would prefer the no injuries athlete over the injuries athlete, of course, because it's, you know, a higher chance of success of them having a good competition, and then, you know, there's buy-in from the results standpoint, and then after the competition you could start reeling in the personality traits of them being able to kind of take on feedback and be coachable. So again, just to provide a different scenario, I think, yeah, definitely option 1, but option 2 definitely has its place in terms of if there was like a shorter timeline that you're working with an athlete and they come on with you because, you know, they want results with you and they have this competition. So you kind of just like weed your way through that scenario as best you can. And then after the competition, start working on like the relationship in terms of how coachable they are.
Yeah. And Dave?
Cool. I don't really have too much to add. All I'll say is that I'll take option 1 because I really enjoy working with people who, I guess, like are there to be coached. Like they hire a coach to be coached, and it makes both our lives a whole lot easier. And I've also found progression is also easier because with those athletes, if you are, you know, changing the program to manage injuries and things like that, they always execute the program well. So what you're implementing to help manage things gets applied, and therefore it works, and you can do these little workarounds and things like that. So I always prefer option 1 easily.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. We'll go through a quick, more fun one. I'm not sure if it'll lead to a conversation or not, but let's go. Would you rather an untrimmed video or no caption when videos are getting sent? Shania?
Well, I'll go real quick.
You go, Sam.
I was unmuted.
Untrimmed.
I actually don't mind untrimmed videos because I just think about it last night. I think I just have a natural habit of like skipping forward anyway when I open a video. So I actually don't mind if I have like this 2-minute clip because I've mastered the art of just going bang, 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 skipping through to where I need to watch.
Yeah.
That sounds like you never had any client send you an untrimmed video before in your life.
What do you mean?
If you're that quick to do it, it means you've never been sent a trimmed video. It's just every client sends you untrimmed. So you've got like, you're just so used to just like having to skip forward on everyone.
There's been a couple where it's like a 2-minute video and like you've got to like, but I just laser, I'm like a hawk. I just go straight where I need to. And I prefer that than having like no context.
Interesting. I think like to try and relate it to or an athlete that might be listening, right? Like untrimmed video, if anything, at worst, it's just like a pet peeve of a coach. Like Sam said, like we can always just kind of scroll, but when it's like multiple videos, that's when it can get a little bit annoying. But it's just like a pet peeve of a coach, right? It doesn't really negatively impact an athlete because at the end of the day, we're just going to find what we need to find anyways. But the problem with like no caption is sometimes we might miss a bit of context. And that's when it gets really important, right? Because outside of the training video, if someone can like mention things that might be impacting training coming in, I would much rather know where the athlete is at mentally, preparation wise, than me having to go through like the slight inconvenience of an untrimmed video. That's not to say that start sending your videos untrimmed, but it's like you still need to do your due diligence as an athlete to make sure that the coach understands where you are mentally.
Yeah, well, like otherwise you can be like, oh, that like didn't move so well, and then the athlete can be like, oh, I thought it was great, and then you're like, sick.
Well,
Yeah,
untrimmed
exactly.
videos also give you like context like before the lift actually starts, right? Like so you can like being able to like scroll through or like move through and start the video where you want to as a coach can actually give you like more information anyway and can give you things that you're trying to look for rather than like getting these like perfectly trimmed videos and then needing to like send that message back of like, oh, can I see your setup or can I see the unrack of the squat or whatever as well. So there's definitely like pros to getting untrimmed like videos, I think.
Yeah, that's true. Sometimes I would have to ask, like, can I see your bench
Yeah.
setup from like
Yeah.
before you even grab the bar, right?
Yeah.
So sometimes those elements are quite important as well. Yeah. I think we teed that pretty well. We'll go another one here. Would you rather an athlete over communicate with you and be sent unnecessary information, or be given under communication? So essentially no videos, messages, and you as a coach have to reach out to, get your information.
I feel like we're all going to be so different on this one.
Very different.
Let's go for it. Shania, you
I'm
want to
going
jump in on this one?
over communicate.
Why is that?
I feel like when someone over communicates, it gives you, like, as the coach, like, all of the information, and then you can pick and choose which are the key points that you need to reply back to, or like create conversation about. So like, and that can be in any context, right? I think as humans, it's like, we build this relationship with our coach, and that can mean that we feel comfortable sending them videos and sending information that they may not deem important or needed, but it's almost like, oh, the Sam's gonna laugh when I say this, but it's like a way of like journaling in a way. Like if you have a training journal, like you write notes down, like you can do that by giving it to your coach, and then it's kind of like out of mind, like you've said it, like it's in a message, you can kind of just move on and finish your training session if that's like related to anything to do with, niggles or injuries or like slight discomforts that are coming out. And then it's kind of like up to the coach on whether they feel the need to like address it based on whether they think it's, like a green, red, yellow flag, or, if the client or the athlete is just putting it in there to like kind of like make them feel better, and because they think that you need it. I think that it's like up to you as the coach whether you're going to allow it to create noise as a coach or not. I think having the conversation of like, hey, you don't need to tell me this, can sometimes create more noise, because then the athlete doesn't know what to say to you. Whereas if you just kind of let them over communicate, they're doing what they feel comfortable, and then you as the coach, it's like your job to decipher what is needed and like what you need to respond to and what you don't. Like what you need to acknowledge, what you need to go into more depth, or if you can kind of just say like, yep, like thanks for letting me know, like, and just kind of move on, kind of thing.
Yeah, I agree with that as well. Like having someone over communicate with you, I guess, could imply that they trust you, right? But I think where it can get a little bit blurred is if you're not able to maintain your own boundaries as a coach, right? So where it can get muddled is if like it starts getting off track from being a coach-athlete relationship, and it just doesn't end up becoming productive in that manner. But aside from that itself, right, I think I'll still prefer over communication and being able to decipher information on my own. That way, like you said, Chanel, like you can get what you need out of the whole, I guess, noise of communication, and get what you need out of that. Versus I find with under communication at times, like it could get difficult having to, I guess, follow up with someone and see how their training is going, especially on a week-to-week basis, when like we are expecting high communication in order to be able to see these trends day to day, right? If you're constantly having a check up on someone to see how they're going, it can get quite difficult, right? And there can sometimes be times where things just slip under the rug due to under communication, right? And you won't know until you start asking these questions. But yeah, like I find I would definitely prefer over communication and having this ongoing relationship rather than having a constantly chase tail in terms of under communicating. Sam, Dave?
I'll agree with you guys. I would much prefer the over communication part, because it's always better to have more, I guess, more info, kind of like Shania said, than less. The only thing that I'm thinking about now is if this hypothetical situation was my entire roster. So like every client I had either overshares or undershares, and then what that would look like. And I feel like that's a much harder question, because in isolation, if it's just a couple of clients here and there, like just like spilling heaps and heaps of stuff, that's fine. But I think that question would be a whole lot harder to answer if it was every person that I coach was all doing the same thing. And I think that could be another interesting thing to talk about is, would you still pick what you picked if it was your entire roster doing it all at the same time?
Yeah, that's true.
I think to segue off that, also I think that the big thing with like over communicating is that kind of noise element, where you briefly touched on in terms of like creating boundaries, not only between like the coach and athlete, but boundaries so the athlete can kind of learn to decipher what's, you know, useful information that's relative to their training and not. So I think like, yeah, kind of like what was Dave was saying, if we have, you know, X amount of athletes and they're all like oversharing, it would become so noisy for us from the coach perspective in terms of keeping tabs on all these people's training, as opposed to the other side of the coin where it's more just that, you know, we're looking at videos, we're looking at bar speed, we're looking at something, how something moves week to week to week, without knowing much else. Like, yeah, it's a funny one because, like, I guess, oh, I'm gonna be a fence sitter. Damn, I call it tonight for being a fence sitter, but I think I'm gonna be.
I would say over communicating at the start is better because then you can set boundaries. So I think the over communicating like opens the line of communication with your coach to start with. So you create that feeling of like trust, you create the relationship, and then it like, that means that like if anything is to happen, you know, whether there are niggles or injuries that come down, they know that they can come to you because they trust you. But then it's like you as the coach set the boundaries of like, okay, what's useful, what isn't, you know. If it's like we're talking like intercom prep, it's like we don't need the messages of like, I'm tired, because we're like, yes, we know you're tired, like you're supposed to be tired. But I think when you start with over communication, you get to set the boundaries. So you get to kind of, as the coach, like we get to kind of control where that then goes, rather than them under communicating and potentially always under communicating and then us trying to get more information, which is like almost harder from my perspective.
Yeah, I would agree. If anything, it's the challenge of the coach to be able to maintain that boundary and set the communication. Like, although it's a hypothetical, right? Like we need to address that it's like we're aiming for good ongoing communication, not over communicating or under communicating, right? And with that comes needing to set boundaries effectively as a coach. Yeah. Leanne, did you want to jump in on this one as well?
I think that definitely the first person, so someone who over communicates. I think that over time communication should evolve with an athlete. So if someone comes to you and they start by, I guess, over communicating or telling you more than what they need to, I think that's all right, because then you can kind of get an idea of their personality as well as an athlete. And then you can kind of allow that to evolve with time. So like some of my longer term clients, like they started and they came to me and they would tell me like everything in terms of like their training. Again, the boundary is important, but then it's kind of evolved where like I know what they're like as an athlete, so I can trust them and they can trust me as time's gone on, where like they can send through their video, you know, they send through their RP, whatever, and maybe like a small little caption, but they don't have to kind of go through everything, because it's like I know what their week looks like. I know what they're doing like for work, etc. So it's like I kind of know where they're at in terms of like their training, and they don't have to actually go into a lot of detail. So yeah, I think the evolvement of communication is important with time with an athlete.
Yeah. Okay. And all right. So I think that about ties up like where we want to kind of like go with as coaches. We'll cover just a briefly, like maybe one or two from an athlete perspective. And hopefully it's kind of sparks like where our heads are at as athletes. Okay, so first one I've got here, would you guys rather be able to instantly recover from pain or injury but see small progression, or see massive progression but also experience huge drop-offs and comebacks and like have that kind of cycle due to pain and injury?
Can you just clarify who gets stronger at the end of this?
Wait, what do you mean? Let's go as actually we could turn this to a athlete one. So let's say someone that you coach has really good recoverability and you see minimal progression versus that person who has these huge spikes and troughs.
So who would you rather coach in that scenario?
Yeah, let's go. Who would you rather coach? And then you could touch on yourself.
Oh, I'll jump in, Dave, while you're thinking. I'm a marathon kind of guy. I play the long game, and I think I would prefer that with my shit. Okay, I'll go my point first. From an athlete side, if both people get stronger, let's say, or get the same level of strength at the end of it, but the person with like, you know, no injuries or there's no big spikes, it just takes them longer, I'm picking that, because it's probably going to be more consistent training, more enjoyment in training week to week, month to month, year to year. And I think that's probably going to be a healthier, sustainable relationship with the sport, as opposed to someone who's having these big spikes, getting injured, having a downtrend, feeling sad and shitty, but then coming back and having to constantly like pick yourself back up. I think I would prefer just to play the longer game on that.
But what happens if the injury person, if you kept getting injured and it was up, down, if that person got stronger, what would you pick? Like if it was like 850 total versus 900.
Comeback's always greater. Comeback's always greater. I'm second option.
Okay. Yeah, if that person's stronger, I'm picking the injury person.
It's hard, right? Like let's say the person who does get injured does come back stronger than the person who makes more progressions, right? You would naturally say like, yeah, they're going to be more competitive. So yes, I would pick the person who goes through the injury kind of cycle, right? But it's like, it's hard also acknowledging if you as an athlete go through that, right? Like imagine the mental journey you'd have to go every time like you see this massive spike, get injured. You run the risk of like almost burning out of the sport and possibly quitting before you even come back every time you get injured.
That's
right?
where I was going with that.
Burnout's inevitable.
Okay.
So I think
can
with
happen in any part of your life.
Yeah, I think with that though, you have to look into like, okay, if you are constantly going through these like really highs and really lows, you're gonna need to have a support team around you that can actually add value to your powerlifting experience, right? Like, so someone like an EP, sports psychologist, a coach as well, friends and family, like those all need to be in place if you are experiencing like going through injury, right? Like, and if we take it to a more realistic scenario, right? Sometimes people aren't that second scenario probably doesn't see as much potential gain as someone who does see consistent progress, right? But the need to have support around that is probably much greater. So mature.
I mean, you could flip the story and like, let's just say like person one, right? Like if their recoverability is that high and they're seeing like really minimal progress, it's like you could flip it and say like that they're just going to get bored with the sport in like 1 to 2 years because they're hardly seeing PRs, they're not seeing progression on strength. They don't feel like they're getting stronger. So it's like there's one burnout from having to deal with high highs and low lows from an injury perspective, but you can also have like burnout from the sense of them just being like, well, I'm not seeing progress, so why am I going to keep staying in the sport and keep kind of like trying to progress? It's like, what's the point,
Not having that like thrill, thrill, those big PRs, and even like, like the thrill and the agony, right? It goes both ways. Like,
yeah,
it does feel good when you, from that, it does also feel good when you do come back from these injuries as well. And then you see the light again and you get even stronger. So yeah, we're just fences, aren't we?
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, like, if you're the person that gets really strong and then gets injured and stuff, it's also from like a competition standpoint, it's also probably going to be less predictable where like you might go into like a nationals, but be injured and then just perform like crap because, maybe you are stronger than everyone else, but you're just in this point of time where you're injured and you can't showcase that. So that's like another side of it where like you could go into a meet and perform badly, not because you're weaker, but because you can't actually perform due to injury. And then that can also just lead to another spiral or another, mental headache that you have to overcome.
Yeah, I think if I were to make a decision though, it would probably be to make the small consistent progression year after year, right? So by the time you're 10 years down the track, you could be potentially unbeatable versus someone by year 4 who's unbeatable, but you have windows of like vulnerability, right? That's me as an athlete, but as a coach, like imagine having to manage someone who constantly gets injured as well, right? Like as a coach, you can't do that on your own. You need like referral systems, things like that to be able to work with an athlete like that. Yeah. Okay, we'll go to the next one. We've got make it to Sheffield and risk bombing, or hitting a world record in the gym but no recording or witnesses.
First one.
Nice.
What records don't count?
right?
I think
What records don't count in the gym?
Yeah, I agree.
that's true.
I agree.
Yeah, if you think it out, right? Like you go, Leanne.
Yeah, Sheffield is like number one, right? Like that's the top of the top. So it's like, I guess if you're at that level where you're like wanting to compete internationally and like get there, that's like the top of the peak. So it's like you have to take that risk of like, it's always going to be a risk, right? Like bombing is something that happens. It's like you just have to trust yourself and like to be able to get there. It's like even to just say you've got to Sheffield is like ridiculous. So like, yeah, definitely not the first option.
Yeah. Thinking it out, it's like, yeah, it's a no-brainer, right? Like you go to Sheffield, you're probably in contention already for a record. So athlete or as a coach, like the adrenaline is definitely going to be there, whether you're at Sheffield and having a good day or at Sheffield and risking bombing, right? So it's like, yeah, it'd be Sheffield 10 out of 10. It's hard to argue for hitting a world record in the gym.
That don't count.
Yeah.
And the world record person, are they going to Worlds?
So,
Huh?
like the person who hits a world record in the gym?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think if you could argue if they're strong enough, yeah, definitely. So same kind of caliber.
I just want to pull a fat deadlift.
Oh, that's sure.
All right. If it was 400 kilos and I'm at the tail end of my powerlifting career, I'm pulling 400 in the gym, no one's seeing it, and then I'm going home, I'm having 2 burgers and going to bed and just sleeping like a big happy boy.
So it's satisfying, right? Like, I mean, in like you know you've hit your goals. So it's like,
yeah,
you're tossing it up between like external like validation versus like if you know you've hit it, like that amount of confidence is gonna take you somewhere anyways, regardless.
Yeah. I'm taking that. What do you reckon?
I think it's so embarrassing to bomb at the biggest meet ever, bro. That's insane.
Wait, is it you bombed or is it like you're taking the risk of bombing? Because that's
it's a risk. So like, let's say
take the risk. 100%.
Take the risk. I'll take the risk for sure. Fuck it. I'll go Sheffield and risk it. Just go like 3 from 9 or something. Like take the risk. I'll take that.
Okay. And we'll finish it off with the last athlete one we've got here. Let's go with would you rather no injuries from now or go back to when you started with the knowledge you have now?
I said this one, didn't I? This is a good one. Say one more time for me.
So no injuries from now or go back to when you started with the knowledge you have.
I'll take no injuries from now. Easy. I'm still young. I got time. I'll take no injuries from now. Is that like forever, like no matter what? Or
so like in this hypothetical, like let's say no injuries from now, but the potential to, I guess, like have another significant injury or something like that may pop up. Doesn't mean you're invincible.
Yeah, okay. I'll take no injuries from now. I'll take that.
All right. I'm gonna go. I'll go the opposite. I'll go back. I feel like I've learned a lot, just like from a contrast of when I started powerlifting, like the last like 3 to 5 years. I feel like I've learned a lot, and I would like to soak that up as a junior and like have a crack.
Like, can we go back to like 14 years old? So just be like a prodigy and like, if I can go back that far, 100% I'm going back. But
then I sound like I'm having regrets on what I've done, which I haven't, because it's all been part of the journey. But I just think having that knowledge now as a younger lifter can take you very far, as we've seen, like with lifters these days. Yeah, I'm going back.
we're going back.
Man, what's your take on this?
I would definitely say the no injuries. So I've still got a long while in this sport, so I don't think I need to go back. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
it's a fair
easily
take.
easily no injuries. Just keep going.
I think I would also take no injuries from now on. Like the mature, like if we were being mature, you would say you'd go back with the knowledge you have now, right? And you'd have a fresh slate and you can start from the beginning. But I think it'll reach a point eventually where accidents are just going to happen in terms of like injury, right? And yes, you have the knowledge to be able to manage through pain, and you can you have a network, you can substitute exercises, you can manage fatigue and do all that, but it's going to happen regardless. At some point, you're going to potentially push a peak that's too hard. You might accidentally do something in training that's going to like have a flare up, right? So I think now with the knowledge you have now, it's just ongoing application regardless. So if you had no injuries from now, or like no major injuries, like you're going to be able to reapply those things and you're still going to continue where you are going, right? But if you started from where you were in the beginning with the knowledge you have now, you could argue that it's eventually going to take you to the same point that where you are right now.
Yeah, and there's no guarantees, right?
Yeah,
Like, can go back, and there's no guarantee that you're going to be stronger, because like you can look at like everyone having some sort of ceiling at their age that they're training, and like how far can you actually push that ceiling just purely with programming principles and knowledge and nutrition and all that.
Yeah. It's hard, right? Because like once you've got that knowledge, you still need to apply it again for another 8 years or 10 years, right? That's where you start to see the fruition of the result of the programming, right? Like, yes, you can apply what we know now, which is like daily undulating periodization, being able to control loads, knowing when to push, when to pull back, how to manage fatigue. But you need to apply those concepts for a long period of time, even if you have like the most up-to-date knowledge, right? Like you can have the perfect program on paper, but it still requires application, which I think if you're going from like no injuries to now, like it's been your whole career's worth of application through the trials and errors. The main constant that gets you to this point is the application. So yeah, I would argue like even if you had the knowledge you had then, you would still be learning.
Yeah, and like even like we touched on last week, like even like learning through those mistakes and learning through those injuries in terms of using that to build that database of your own programming in your own body, your own training to get stronger. So I guess you miss out on that kind of learning process of training by going back.
Yeah, exactly.
Again, watching Junior World, I'm like, damn, I just want to be. I think I'm just riding the Junior World type and talking to Nathan this morning. I'm like, damn, this is like, just seems like such a rush. Like, LJ would have known, like going to Junior Worlds, right? Like just all that young energy. I don't know. I don't know where I'm going with it.
Young energy.
Yeah, like it's just like I feel old. It's just like just benching after the banquet with your shirt off. Take me back.
I definitely saw that as well. But yeah, I think yeah, we'll probably finish things off there. But if you do take the time to listen to this, it's not so much about the would you rathers that you would listen to. It's more so reading in between the lines and what those imply, right? So huge lessons to be taken out of this. Like at best, most things don't need to be taken to the extreme. If you take a middle way approach to things, like that's probably the best way to go. But yeah, like hopefully you guys take some good takeaways from this one, and we'll see you in the next episode.